Hello students, have a blissful morning. I welcome you all with a very big heart in this video lesson. In continuation of the previous video, here we are going to take up a topic, sexual reproduction in plants, from the chapter Reproduction in Plants. So without further ado, let's get started. Mechanism of sexual reproduction in plants. Children, the sexual reproduction in plants proceed through the following steps. First one is pollination, second fertilization, third is the formation of seed, fourth formation of fruit, and finally germination of seed. Let's start with pollination. The process of transfer of pollen grain from anther of the stamen to the stigma of the carpel is called pollination. It can be of two types. Self-pollination. Self-pollination is transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. This is called as autogamy, or of another flower of the same plant. This is called as heterogamy. So self-pollination is an intra-plant process. Examples: pansy, groundnut, pea, wheat, etc. Advantages and disadvantages of self-pollination. First of all, we'll see advantages. Parental characters are preserved in this process. There is no wastage of pollen grains, and even small quantity of pollen will be sufficient. Flowers need not be large, showy, and scented. Disadvantages. There are few disadvantages of this process also. First is that the weaker or defective characters of the variety or breed cannot be eliminated. And the second one is it does not yield new varieties. Next type of pollination is called as cross-pollination. It is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of the flower of one plant to the stigma of the flower of another plant of same species, and this is called as allogamy. So cross-pollination is an interplant process. Examples where we can see cross-pollination: China rose, marigold, maize, castor, etc. Advantages and disadvantages of cross-pollination. So let's see advantages first. The offsprings are healthier. The seeds produced are abundant and viable. New varieties may be produced by cross-pollinating two different varieties of same species. Disadvantages. The external agents are required for cross-pollination. So it depends on external agents. The pollen has to be produced in large quantity to ensure chances of pollination, which leads to a lot of wastage of pollen. The process is uneconomical for plants because plants have to be large, colored, scented, and have to produce nectar for attracting pollinating agents. Next topic is the agents of pollination. So let's see what agents help in this process of pollination. Wind, insects, and water. These are three important agents of pollination. Each category has some special features to promote chances of pollination. Pollination by wind. The blowing wind carries pollen grains from one flower to other flowers and helps in pollination. Wind-pollinated flowers usually possesses the following special features. Flowers are unisexual, dull colored, without fragrance and nectar. The stamens are long and hang out of the flower to be exposed to winds. Pollen grains are small, light, smooth, and are produced in large number. The stigmas are feathery or sticky and hang out of the flower to trap the pollen grains. Examples: grass, maize, rice, sugarcane, bamboo, palms, etc. Pollination by insects. Insects such as bees and butterflies carry pollens from flower to flower and helps in pollination. When an insect sits on the flower of a plant for sucking nectar, then the pollen grains from the anther of this flower sticks to its body. When this insect carrying pollen grain visits another flower of the same kind, some of the pollen grains get transferred into the stigma of the second flower, and this is how pollination is carried out. Insect pollinated flowers usually have the following special features. Here flowers are brightly colored, fragrant, and secrete nectar. Pollen grains are larger, sticky, spiny, and are produced in less number. The stigma is sticky and often located deep in corolla. Examples: China rose, sunflower, pea, jasmine, marigold, banyan, etc. Next is the pollination by water. Flower of an aquatic plant, particularly those which are submerged in water, releases pollen grains from its anther in water. These pollen grains are carried to the stigma of the flower of another plant of the same kind by water currents, causing pollination. Water pollinated flowers have the following special features in them. Pollen grains are light and are produced in large numbers. In some cases, male flowers are such that they float on the surface of water till they meet female flowers. Examples: Vallisneria, Hydralia, etc. Another type of pollination is called as artificial pollination. Let's see what happens here. When man himself transfers pollen to the stigma, it is called as artificial pollination. In modern times, artificial pollination is a standard practice adopted by plant breeders and scientists in their efforts to evolve new varieties. They remove the anthers in the young flowers, which is called as emasculation, and cover these flowers with plastic bags. Later, they pollinate such flowers with the pollen from the plants of the desired variety. After pollination, next step is fertilization. After a pollen grain falls on the stigma of a flower, the next step is fertilization. The process in which the male gamete present in the pollen grain fuses with the female gamete present in the ovule to form zygote is called as fertilization. It takes place as follows. After pollination, the pollen grain grows a pollen tube downwards through the style towards the female gamete in the ovary. As you can see very clearly in this picture, a male gamete moves down the pollen tube. The pollen tube enters the ovule in the ovary through a small opening called as micropyle. The tip of the pollen tube bursts open and male gamete comes out of pollen tube and fuses with the female gamete present in the ovule to form a fertilized egg cell called as zygote. Zygote develops into an embryo. Embryo is that part of a seed which develops into a new plant. We can say that an embryo is a kind of baby in dormant state. Formation of seed. This is the next step. Post-fertilization changes result in the formation of seed. Zygote divides several times to form an embryo within the ovule. Embryo possesses radicle, tiny root, a plumule, tiny shoot, and cotyledons to store food. Ovule changes into seed. The wall of ovule forms the protective seed. Actually, all the ovules present in the ovary of a flower gets fertilized by pollen grains and to grow become seeds and grow to become seeds. Thus, the ovary of a flower may give rise to a number of seeds. A seed is the sexual reproductive body of a plant which can be used to grow new plants. Next step is the formation of fruit. After fertilization, the ovary of a flower develops and becomes a fruit with seeds inside it. Ovary wall forms the fruit wall, that is called as pericarp. The other parts, such as petals, stamens, style, and stigma, fall off. Sepals may either fall off or remain intact in a dried and shriveled form. Apple and guavas show such dried sepals very clearly, whereas in brinjal it remains as it is. Next and the last step is germination of seed. The process in which a seed begins to grow to form a new plant is called as germination. It occurs as follows. When the seed is sown in the moist soil, it begins to grow. The seed coat then becomes soft and splits. At first, the tiny root, that is radicle, grows downwards, and then the tiny shoot, that is plumule, grows upwards. It should be upward here. This produces seedling of the plant. The seedling grows further and ultimately forms a new plant. Let's see what conditions are necessary for germination of seed. Water, suitable temperature, and air are necessary conditions for the germination of seeds. We must remember that a fresh seed normally does not germinate even if the conditions for germination are favorable. The seeds must pass through a period of dormancy, that is a period of rest, during which it undergoes physiological maturation. In dormant stage, the embryo in the seed remains inactive. So with this, we have come to the end of this lesson. Thank you very much for watching and have an awesome day ahead. Goodbye.